So what is your name and what do you do?
Martin Harris, and currently I'm the Director of Human Resources for a big tech company.
Where are you originally from, Martin?
Marion, Ohio, born and raised.
Born and raised in Marion, Ohio.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your family and how you were raised.
Yeah, so I'm the oldest of three. I'm the only boy. I have two younger sisters. Was raised here in Marion by my mom, biological mom, and my stepdad, and then ended up getting removed from them and going into the foster system for about 7 years, and then got adopted by a wonderful lady by the name of Hattie, and yeah, kind of bounced around from different foster homes. About 7 years, about 20 altogether. So found out who my father was, the alleged fathers, biological fathers. Never really had a relationship with him until I got to be an adult. And it's hit and miss even now, but it's there. But yeah, as far as just the foundations of family and all that's kind of how it got started.
So what was the reasoning that you got taken away from your biological mother?
Yeah. So from the time I was born to about 5 years old, I was with my biological mom. We lived right on Grant Street in Marion. And sexual abuse, drug abuse, physical abuse was paramount for like the first 5 years of my life. And it was horrific to the point to where I would go to school with bruises on me, and the teachers knew something was going on, but back then, actions wasn't really taken to do anything about it. And the abuse that I went through as being the only boy, trying to be the protector of my two younger sisters after watching them go through abuse. There's only so much you can do at, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. So we were actually getting ready to leave the house. We were in my mom's. She had a blue 4-door Chevy, old school Chevy, and I remember me and my sisters were sitting in the back seat. My mom was sitting in the passenger seat, and my stepdad was sitting in the driver's seat. And we were pulling out the driveway, and as he pulled back, he hit a telephone pole, and he had dialysis. Dialysis got triggered. He went into a horrible shock. As a result of that, ended up going to Marion General Hospital. And I never will forget it. We were sitting in the hospital room. All three, me and my two sisters, were sitting on the floor in the hospital room with all the black trash bags. We were getting ready to go to Georgia. And all these people kept coming in the room. My mom was sitting there, she was talking, and my stepdad was laying on the bed, and my little sister was crying. And I was just sitting there just kind of watching all these people come in. And next thing you know, this lady came up to me and stooped down, me and my sisters, and said, you guys ready to go to your new home? I'm like, sure. I didn't know any better. New home? We must be going back home, But they told us to get up, and we followed this lady outside the hospital room, and I noticed my mom was still sitting in the hospital bed beside my stepdad. I'm like, well, my mom ain't coming with us. Right. So I was like, no. I was start getting reluctant and start crying and all that, and they said, well, come on, it's okay. So then Hattie, who's my mom now, my adopted mom, she was right outside the door. And it was at that moment that the process started of being in CPS, Marion County Children's Services, and bounced around to like 20 different foster homes for like 7 years. And then living with, was I the reason, was me saying no to mommy the reason why they took us, all this stuff at 5, 6 years old, you're trying to wrestle with and realizing you're seeing all these people, but you're not seeing the one you called mom or even dad for like the first 5 years of your life. So we were taken because the abuse was so bad that it was noticeable even while we were in the hospital room. And that's when, now that I'm older, read the reports, and I'm talking to my adopted mom. She said, yeah. She said they seen the bruises on you guys, and they called CPS. The nurses and the doctors did. And as a result of that, that's why all them people, I said, oh, now that's why all those people was coming. They was looking at us. Come to find out, they made the decision, we got to take them out of the custody of the biological mom. So, yeah, it shaped a lot of how my life turned out as I grew up, shaped my ideology on a lot of things. But, yeah, that's how I got started, man. That's why we were removed. The abuse was terrible.
Where was the abuse coming from? Was it coming from your mother, your stepfather, both of them?
The physical abuse and the verbal abuse would come from my mom. Man, we would, I would say something crazy, had to eat lotion. We had this big dog in the basement. His name was Bear. And he kept him downstairs. He was just vicious. And we would get in trouble. And sometimes my stepdad, we had various different men coming in and out the house, man. I couldn't even, like 5 different men, maybe. This was like a revolving door of coming in and out the house. And I remember one time I got in trouble and the dog was on a chain in the basement. So we would, at least me, I don't think my sisters ever went through that, but I did something. I think I didn't finish my homework because I remember she took me from the table because the closet was right by the table. Like the table was here and the closet was there. And she sat me, told me to sit on the very top step. And the chain was just enough to where it misses the top step. So as I got older, I'm like, man, she knew. But I was so traumatized because it was so dark, they didn't know. But when the dog seen us, they were cool but that being dark, they don't know. Right. So the dog is just barking and growling and, knowing somebody's in their domain and traumatized me. So for the longest, I hated dogs because of that. But eating lotion, man, that stuff, the physical abuse came from my mom. The whoopings came in, but it was like unusual whoopings, like switches that were just long and just slashing out, belts, buckles, and all this other stuff. Then the sexual abuse, though, came from these various different men, touching, penetration. And as a kid, man, they give you those, well, if you do this, I'll give you candy. So money as I grew up, became a big thing with me, from stealing it, from taking it, because they would bribe me. Like, I'll give you $5, I'll give you $1, I'll give you 2 quarters. So I'm like, man, I get this money. And then they took me to the store and I'm using whatever they just gave me. So I internalized at the time, as long as I let them do this, they're going to give me money. I can buy whatever I want. But then I would get in trouble for having it because my mom never knew about the abuse. And if she did, she never interceded with it. So that was the personal abuse that happened to me. And then I witnessed the abuse. These men would put their hands on my mom, pull knives on her, fist fights, in the back room, just hear her screaming, stop it, get off, my kids in another room. So then I would get up and this mom, start crying because my mom was crying. And then I would get in trouble, take your butt back in, I'm like, so then I go back and I start crying. And my sister see me. It was like a domino effect of just trauma on top of abuse, trauma abuse. It was like a back and forth cycle of trauma abuse. And that shaped a lot of my mentality growing up, unfortunately.
So what was the reasoning for all of those different men being in and out of the house?
Man, I think it was my mom just trying to find that connection. She's trying to find solace in what she wanted and trying to fill a void by these different men. There were so many different people in and out of the house that I didn't even know half of them, but these men, they would be like babysitters to us, and that's when most of the abuse happened. Most of it was drug infused, so most of them were intoxicated or drunk or high or snort, whatever it was they were doing with my mom. Then my mom would leave, or she would just be absent or sleeping in the back room, and then that's whatever happened. These men were just, some of them, I'm your dad, or I'm your stepdad, I think I'm your dad, and at the time, it's okay. So we calling these people uncles or dads or Mr. this, but it was always somebody that we knew, but we didn't know them. We were just told, this is your family, this is your uncle, could be your daddy. And never knew who they were. I just knew what they did to me. Never knew their name, never seen them even in my adult life, never seen them again. But I knew who they were growing up as far as just seeing their faces,
So how did you deal with all that? How did you cope dealing with all that stuff?
Yeah, so the way I coped growing up was reckless. You know, as I got older, that's when I started getting in trouble. So because of the abuse and feeling like I was the result of all the stuff that happened to me, that's where a lot of my trouble came in. So stealing came I was stealing everything. I was stealing from my adopted mom. I was stealing from my everybody. Go to the store, start stealing stuff. Then that caught up with me. Ended up going to the juvenile detention center. Used to be JDC here in Marion. A lot of my adolescent time was spent there. And then I was also cycled in with being addicted to pornography, and because I'm still trying to wrestle with the sexual aggressions that I dealt with as a child, and not having any counseling. And then the counseling I went to never took it seriously, lying because I didn't want people to see me as this bad person, because people pleaser by nature, because again, that childhood stuff. So that ultimately got me in trouble from this stealing. And I would take the money that I would steal at like 18, 16, 17, 18, and then drive all the way to like Columbus or a big city where I knew I would see somebody and pay them, these ladies or whatever. If I paid them $50 or $20 back then, they could flash me. Just because I'm still living in that mindset. But then that stealing caught up with me, that behavior caught up with me. I ended up doing JDC. And then Judge Finnegan, never forget it, he said, "I'm tired of seeing you in here." He said, you got to get it together. And ended up sending me to DYS, or the Department of Youth Services, for 3 months. And then that turned into 9 months because I kept stealing in there and getting in fight, talking back, because I'm still got all this pent up aggression. So that's what I coped with it. It's in a very unhealthy way. And with all that too, it was being raised in church, knowing God, being raised by a godly mom with Hattie, who's my adopted mom, knowing the right way, but definitely not wanting to do it because it was an inconvenience, until finally like an epiphany went off, like, you got to get it together. But it took a long time for that to happen, So yeah, that coping was eventually became healthy. But for a long part of my life, man, it was unhealthy, dangerous, got me locked up, away from my family, labels, until I had to grow up, literally. So listen, enough's enough,
When you were younger, dealing with all that abuse, was there no other family that could interfere to help or anything like that?
No, I mean, when I was still with my biological mom, the only woman or the only person that never did anything wrong, loved us before she passed, was my grandma, which is my biological mom's mom, Grandma Catherine. I remember her very, very vividly, but very limited as well, because she passed away shortly after my sister, Kathleen, was born, and who's Kathleen's named after. It's Grandma Catherine. But in my immediate family, or my biological family rather, there was nobody to step up. There was nobody to take us or qualify from the state's perspective to step in. From my mom's side, from my dad's side, at the time I didn't know who my dad was. Right. So there was no DNA test done. I looked at the birth certificate, and there was no name on my birth certificate, my original one, of a father. Nobody's listed. So there was no reference, even from the father perspective of, let's look at that family. I mean, we knew who my father was, but legally you got to prove that. So the state wasn't going off assumptions. So that's why the foster system became option one for all three of us, because nobody was reliable enough to take us from our biological family.
Did you ever talk to anybody about it when you were going through it, or were you told not to say anything?
Both. I mean, I talked about it out of instinct because, I would just start lashing out saying I miss my mom, and they would have to explain, well, your mom is trying to get better, and as a 7, 8, and you're growing up trying to internalize that, it's like, getting better, what's wrong with her? And then that's when it's like, okay, let's not dig into that. Don't tell him what's wrong because he's too young to understand. So then it was like, in one aspect, we want you to talk about how you're feeling. We want to know how he's feeling. But in the whole other aspect is, let's limit what we can either introduce to him or even have him talk about with these other families we're trying to get to adopt him, So I would lash out even there. So that's why I did a different home, because I was trying to cope in a way that I need to know where my people are. Yeah. And you're giving me, you're not telling me where my mom is at. You're not telling me where my dad's at. So as a kid, I'm like, where's my people? But then I'm trying to cope in a way to make these new people my people. And it was never a way that I never blended those two together. So Yeah, I mean, talking about it at that time, going through it. So when I got adopted, my adopted mom got me in counseling, but in the beginning stages of the counseling, never was honest, never wanted to open up, never definitely didn't want to talk about no abuse because the trauma was very real, So didn't want to. So how are you feeling today, Martin? I'm great. Yeah, he's making great progress. So the being a wordsmith and just knowing what to say, the people pleasing, that became a coping mechanism to me as I got older. So that if I'm always getting people to smile at me and say, man, he's talented, man, he can do this, I don't have to deal with me because everybody's seeing this image that I want them to see and not who I really am.
Right. So have you tried to reach out to your mother since you've got older and ask her why some of the things that was happening?
Yeah. That's when I actually took counseling serious years ago, and they said, just try to make amends and reach out in your own time. So I did. And I know where my mom is now. I still talk to her. I still got her friends on Facebook. She'll comment on my stuff every now and again. I've healed from that. But I asked her, in the very immediate stages of that, I said, Mom, why do we get removed from you? Now, me already knowing the answer, wanted to hear what she said. She was honest. She was like, I wasn't equipped to take care of y'all. She said, I put drugs in front of y'all, men in front of y'all, and I wasn't the mother I needed to be. She said, if I could take it all back, I would. She says, but I thank God for Hattie for taking up and raising y'all because I couldn't have done it. So then I asked her just about the abuse because that's what was sticking with me. Like, did you know that these men were, and immediately deflected, like, no, I said, I would never let anybody do that. And that didn't happen to you. And I'm like, what? And at that point, I wasn't going to go back and forth with her, but I said, I know what happened to me. It's in the reports, the bruises was there. I said, and you didn't know because when it did happen, they made sure you were out of it. Or because when my mom, let me say this too, because I want to make sure I put her in the proper light. When she wasn't on drugs, when she wasn't high, when she wasn't doing the foolishness, she was a mom. Yeah. She was a protector. She would, fight hell for us. If she would get on the freight train and get the first thing smoking that she would say. Well, when my biological mom was sober and clear-minded, we wanted for nothing. We was dressed to the T. We went to Mount Zion, which is like the church right beside Grant Street. We was raised in that church. Mom was mom when she was cool. It was when and unfortunately though, the memory of her not being stable is more prevalent than the times that she was. But even those little times that she was, man, I would say that she was solid. She was the mom. She would hold us. She would cuddle us. She would make sure we was fed, help us with homework, protect us. Ain't gonna talk with my baby. You ain't gonna do this. She was a mom. Yeah. But unfortunately, those times were slimmer than the ones that, the bad outweighed the good in that instance.
Yeah. So how did that make you feel that she tried to tell you that I'm sure a memory that is pretty vivid in your mind never happened?
Rejection. I mean, it was like the childhood all over again because I would go to her even as a kid and tell her that this happened to me. They did this. This guy did this. And she would just slap, it didn't happen to you. Stop lying. And she said, we ain't going to do that. And when she would ask me if something happened to you, I would say no, knowing it did. So saying that as an adult, knowing better, knowing what happened to me, and I was a grown man telling you this, and you still give me that trauma type answer. I'm like, what? So then I was like, okay, well, I appreciate it. So I'm going to just hang up now because I'm getting respectful. Before I say something that's disrespectful, I'm just hang up now. She says, well, if I don't remember, you can't fault me for not remembering. Right. I said, yeah, that's the problem. And that's what I told her. I said, that's the problem. The fact that you don't remember is what hurts even more because you somewhat want to acknowledge it, but you telling me you acknowledge it, you just don't remember it. Yeah. To me, that means something happened. And so it hurt because she would acknowledge like maybe it did happen, but I just don't remember it. Can't fault her for that because in her state of mind during no time, she wouldn't have. So I can't fault her for that, at least now, after some growth. But at the time, it's like just to outlandishly deny it. When I ask you about it, I would have appreciated that answer in the very beginning. It's like, hey, if it happened, I don't remember and I apologize. Right, exactly. So.
And you don't have to get too far into detail about it. Are there any stories specifically that stand out to you when these men would do some of the things that they would do to you?
Yeah. Yeah, one in particular, and I think I shared this some years ago because I was dealing with it heavy and I'm released from it. So I share this to help somebody else that may feel like they can't talk about it because exposing it brings healing. Yeah. So, but there was one guy, his name was Michael. I remember his name simply because that's what my mom yelled when she walked into the room and seen him on top of me. But I came home from school one day, and we went to Silver Street Elementary, and we rode the bus. Yeah, Silver Street, man, that's it. We rode the bus back, and back then they didn't really care because back then there was no school in Fair Park, so Silver Street was the school. That's where, I came back, we came off the bus, and we came inside, and this guy, Michael, was sitting on the couch. And my baby sister was still little, so she was still in the crib. I mean, she wasn't, and I was 4 years old, so Annie would have been 1. Yeah, because we're 3 years apart. Kathleen was probably 2 or 3. But I remember I came inside the house, and as is my custom, my mom was very alert. She took us to school, come home, get your homework done. Uncle Mike's going to be there. So we sat at this table, and I just knew time to do some homework done. So I'm sitting at the table and I'm getting my homework done. I'm doing my homework. And he walks up behind me and says, what are you doing? I said, I'm just doing my homework. And he says, okay. He says, well, it's time to put it up. And I was like, Mommy said I got to get it done. And I kept working. And he looked at me and said, I said it's time to put it up. It's time to come in here and watch TV now. You can do the homework later. And in my mind, I'm like, Mommy said I got to do this homework. So I kept doing it. And he hauled back and slapped me. And I start screaming. 4 years old, he slapped me, a grown man slapped me. I was hollering. And shut that noise up. And took the paper, flew it off the table, picked me up and threw me on the couch. And at the time, I remember this vividly. WWF was on TV. And I remember it was crazy because The Undertaker was making his introduction. It was black. The living room was dark. He had the blinds were shut and the TV went black. And the next thing you know, The Undertaker appeared in the ring, because at that moment is when he stood in front of me and pulled his pants down. And that's when the bribery with the money came. He said he pulled out $2. Well, actually, I remember it was $1.04. And he says, I'll give you this and go to the store and get some candy afterwards, but you got to be quiet. So I took the money and I put it beside me. He pulled his pants down and he said, go ahead and touch it. And I'm looking up at him, looking down at what he's, and I just start crying. Because I'm like, I'm always, when my mom, again, when she's sober, that's your bad spot, don't nobody, and I start crying. He slaps me again. He said, I told you to shut that noise up. That's why I gave you the money. You took the money. You got to be quiet. So I'm looking back at the money. He said, I'll just take the money back. I was like, no. So, okay, you got the money, be quiet. So my sister woke up because I was crying and woke my baby sister up. She starts screaming. So then he pulls me to the back room. And in the back room, he took a broomstick and shoved it up inside of me. And I start screaming. Blood was everywhere. And at that time, Kathleen wasn't home yet. She had just walked in the house with my mom. And my mom heard me screaming. I remember Mama's sober now. Ain't no drugs. She comes in, she sees him over top of me with this broomstick. And I'm screaming, Mommy. And he looks at her and says, Candy, I got to go. And she says, you ain't going nowhere. And at that point, now the whole time they're having this conversation, this broomstick is still inside. So I'm screaming for my mom. She's trying to defend me in my honor, but I'm screaming like she thinks I'm screaming because of the pain, not realizing that I'm still raped at this point with the stick. Until she seen the blood hit her foot, because the way the bed, there was no, the mattress sits on the frame. There was no frame. It was just on the floor. So finally she looks down, the blood, she's like, oh my gosh. She ran out, called the police. He runs out and completely leaves the house. Police comes in, and the police asked me, what happened to you? And I said, Uncle Mike shoved this. What broomstick? At that moment, the broomstick was nowhere to be found. So they thought I was lying. She told them, as I read the reports and I got older, that I was playing around with myself because I didn't want to do the homework after my Uncle Mike told me to. And that's how the blood happened. Wow. which was the first official CPS report that's documented in my file. I read back on that, and this was some years ago. And I'm like, what? Because I knew what happened. She knew what happened. So in my mind, that warped me. So that's the first offense that ever happened to me. And then it kept happening with the same dude, like 2 or 3 other ones. But he was the most brutal with it because he didn't care. But I learned growing up, he was the drug pusher. He was providing the bills. He was paying everything. The money came from him. That's why she kept him around.
Go ahead and talk about your life now, your relationship. You have kids, you said.
Yeah. Yeah, now things are trending very well. It has been probably for like the past 5 years, 6 years consistently. I'm engaged. And ironically, the woman I'm engaged to was the woman I was married to before. So when I was talking about that mental angst, that played a role in my relationship with her. We were married before, and I wasn't faithful. I was just, still living in that addictive behavior. And she said, I can't do that. So she divorced me. And then it took some growth. It took some counsel. It took getting deeper in God. It took me just taking my life personally, taking my life seriously first, personally. And then she said, okay, then people start saying, man, there's something different about you now. Yeah, because now I'm stopping worried about everybody else. I wouldn't say it took me losing my marriage, but it did, because it woke me up, visitation with my kids and all that stuff I ain't used to. I'm used to being around and one thing I always vowed is I want to be a present father. Yeah. I've always vowed that. And I'm blessed to say that's what I am today. But we're engaged again, plan to get married in December. The right way, there's honesty, there's openness, there's transparency, there's truth, there's consistency, there's no secrets. Anytime she wants the phone, she gets it. Just, and not that she's trying to check up on, but just a test. Like, hey, let me use your phone real quick. Okay, no problem. Back in the day, let me use your phone. For what? I didn't really need it. I just want to see if you would give it to me. Now it's like, here you go. And she'll have it for hours. I don't care because it's just that, but it's that growth. But yeah, 4 kids. They're mine. Now I have one child biologically with Lauren, but she had 3 when we met. But I raised them. Her oldest is 11, and we've known each other for about 10 years. So I raised them. And one of my greatest honors is being a father. It's rewarding. It's tiring sometimes. I'll tell anybody. It's not for the weak. But I do it with the arsenal of people behind me, both on her side and mine, that, again, God is the center of all of that. So that's the other big thing that I'll be remiss to have an opportunity to speak to hundreds possibly with this and not say that God's the center of it all. Yeah. The focal point of the growth, the change, the development, the deliverance comes from God Almighty. And that's who's got me where I am today, and continually. Now I'm a minister. I do a lot of speaking, not this deep. So I appreciate the platform on Heard, and because it's probably the most in-depth as far as really pulling back the vulnerability, because usually I'm speaking about, the Bible, getting people to their necks, trying to motivate people, standing behind the mic, and just saying you can do it. But sometimes before you can tell somebody they can do it, they want to know, how did you do it? And I think this platform did that. So, I have a solid career. Been working as a director of human resources for this same company for 5 consecutive years. A lot of responsibility, but very rewarding. So if you're looking for a job, let me know. I can put you to work. But yeah, just trending in the right direction, man, and just being true to myself. Not putting on the front, just being real. And the old me would have never done this, because it brings vulnerability, admitting that you're addicted to things and being in trouble, and even if people know it, it's only confirmed when you say it. Well, I'm here to confirm it because it's not who I am. So it speaks to the growth, but it also speaks to, you don't got to stay where you're at, but it takes that, realizing that, So I thank God where I'm at.
So what would you say to a child or even an adult going through some similar things that you went through, that's trying to deal with that and is trying to cope and isn't sure who they can talk to about it?
Yeah, first thing is find somebody to talk to. I know that's a cliche you hear all the time, but I'm telling you from personal experience, the key to any deliverance, any healing, is making it known, exposure. There's healing and revealing. So the first thing I would say is, I don't care if it's a friend. I don't care if it's your grandmama. I don't care if it's a teacher. I don't care if it's your boss at work. Okay, I find somebody to say, hey, I got to talk about this. Even if you don't think it is going to do anything immediately, I promise you, getting it out may not make it seem like it, but you've made waves just by voicing the hurt. Because now the moment it's exposed, it can't haunt you. Yeah. So the first thing I would say to anybody, child, man, woman, boy, girl, teenager, whatever you're going through, and if it's weighing on you, bring somebody else into your world. And I know trust is a big thing. I'm working on a book. It's called The 4 T's. And one of the second T's is trust. Yeah. The first one's time, though. Somebody that you spent time with and that you can trust, be transparent with them so then they can give you a truth. But I would say, find somebody to talk to. And I know, like I said, it's a cliche. People say it all the time, but it's so true. So true.
The things that I ask you guys to come on here and talk about, a lot of them aren't easy to talk about at all, especially yours. I'm not even sure if I could do it, and I'm the one that made the channel. Yeah. So what gave you the courage to come here today and share your experience?
Helping people. Helping somebody that may be in the same situation or that has went through it and trying to figure out what their next is. Everybody next is different. You know, the biggest struggle that I think anybody will go through in life is the mental one. It's not the financial one, it's the mental one. It's the mental angst. And I love that you asked that. It's the mental angst that you have that keeps you in this bondage, that makes you feel like you're less than or you're not worthy. You know, so what made me do this is just let you know, people that know me know, yeah, Martin came a long way because, you know, I'm not known, but most of Marion know Martin. But they've also know the hell Martin has caused and the things he's been through. But to be able to talk about it isn't to gloat. What talks about it is being able to say, hey, I've been through it, but it's not who I am. Yeah. So hopefully this platform and this opportunity for the many others that came before me that'll come after me on this wonderful work knows that people that's sharing this just wants to help you. They don't know you. We don't know who's going to touch, but hopefully something you hear just knows that, hey, if they can do it after I heard what I heard from that person, man, maybe there is something, and there is. I promise you there is.